The Milwaukee Auto Show is an annually held auto showcase in Milwaukee, Wisconsin that's one of hundreds of annually held shows across the country that serves as the go-to place to see what's new and upcoming in the automotive world. Additionally, there's vendors, collection showcases, and test drive events that keep these shows varied and hands-on. And today, I'm going to recap what I saw at the 2024 Milwaukee Auto Show and go over what's new, what's upcoming, and tell you what I think is interesting and what I think isn't. So sit back, relax, and let's check out the 2024 Milwaukee Auto Show here on Veloce Midwest. Like any annual auto showcase, the Milwaukee Auto Show comes around once a year, usually held at the Baird Center in downtown Milwaukee. If you're unfamiliar with Milwaukee, it's a relatively historic city located in the state of Wisconsin on the western side of Lake Michigan, directly north of Chicago, Illinois. Though it doesn't carry a ton of automotive significance in of itself, it is the current HQ of Royal Enfield's US branch and is near the city of Kenosha, once the home of AMC. The Milwaukee Auto Show is situated between two floors of the Baird Center, with the first floor containing some classic car clubs and the majority of your luxury car makes. The second floor contains displays for local companies, food court, and all your more typical car makes like Ford, Chevy, and Toyota. Now, the thing to note here is that many of the cars put on display are actually provided not by the marques themselves, but local dealerships. This sometimes allows for a slightly wider array of vehicles on display. Perhaps more notably, this is also how something like Chrysler gets to show up, despite Stellantis, Chrysler's parent company, pulling out of auto shows like the Chicago one. Anyways, let's get on the floor and start going through this trip. The first room generally visited on the first floor is a small space dedicated to Land Rover and Volvo, provided by the Fields Volvo Land Rover dealership in Waukesha. They basically bring out some of the nicer cars from their lot, although this year there were fewer cars in here than usual, and somewhat annoyingly, they were all locked. The way that goes is that if the car's windows are rolled down, it generally means you can open the car and climb inside to check it out. Usually the Volvos are open, as seen in my last Milwaukee Auto Show video, but that wasn't the case this time around. The most notable cars on display here, however, are the new Black Edition Volvos, a new trim level. If you like murdered out cars, Volvo gives you the option now to have everything blacked out from the factory, and this includes window tint, black badges, black trim, and black wheels. If you option black paint, you have the stealthiest of Volvos, like this XC90. Interestingly, the badge on the front of the car is just the shape of the Volvo badge, all black and without any detail. Sort of odd, sort of interesting. However, as seen with this S60, you don't need black paint and can have more of a tuxedo look to your car instead. And I actually like this more than the all-black XC90 there, though the S60 is simply a very good looking car to begin with, so this black and white tuxedo combo works, in my opinion. There were also a couple of Land Rover Defenders in this room as well. Although these are not new vehicles, I still find these rather interesting. These were showing the difference between a relatively base-level Defender 90 and a very well-optioned Defender 110. The latter on the 110 got a lot of comments, so I personally really like the 90 in the configuration shown. I like the color, I like the wheel cover, and I like the proportions. If I had the cash, it's the one I'd buy out of the two, though I do like the options on the 110. Unfortunately, neither of these cars were open either, so I still haven't really been able to get up close and personal with the interior quality of a Land Rover. These vehicles seem to be very popular though, despite some of the concerns with Land Rover's reliability, as I see these quite often out on the roads. Moving on out of this room, you get to the main first floor room where the rest of your luxury brands are residing, including Lincoln, Cadillac, BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, Acura, and Porsche. Since they were right in front, I checked out the Lincolns first, including the brand new 2024 Nautilus. I believe this car is meant to showcase future Lincoln styling efforts, still looking for a bit of that Range Rover feel, but with a more unique fascia. Given that their previous look was a cross between Audi and Jaguar, and thus didn't stand out all too well, I don't mind this new look. The headlights have a wing look to them, which I feel is going back to that wing-style front fascia from the 2010s. The interior had an appropriately luxurious feeling, with a newly designed steering wheel, which I liked the look and feel of, very nice materials and colors, and a big curved dash, which had this encompassing cockpit feel. There was a crystal volume knob, which reminded me of some of the Volvo inscription level cars, and the seats were very comfortable. There was a decent mix of buttons and screen options, and although I liked the switchgear design of the drive selection, I've wondered how ergonomic it really is in real-world applications to not have all those options or single control like most cars, like say a gear selector stick or a column shifter or a dial. The door handles were non-moving shapes built into the design of the doors, which was interesting. The other Lincolns were still using previous design cues inside and out, but the interiors to these I felt were still very nice, including that of the Aviator. The seats had tons of adjustments, the color choices were gorgeous in these, and I felt that these must have been some very highly trimmed cars. I had a bit of fun playing with the Aviator seats, though the design did kind of remind me of an alien facehugger for some reason. Not a big fan of the way the steering wheel feels the materials, but everything else feels very nice in here actually. I will say the wheel just felt cheaper than the rest of the car for some reason and didn't feel as nice as the one in the brand new Nautilus. Also relatively interesting again was the door handle, which while shaped like a regular handle, it was not actually a latch release, rather it was an electronic button that you pushed on the inside of the handle to open the door. Not sure how I feel about that as far as longevity and in practice use, just being used to, regular latch door handles. I believe the Aviator will be getting a similar looking restyling to the Nautilus, and by the time I publish this video, it may even be out revealed and all that. Across the way from the Lincolns, though, were their domestic competitor, Cadillac, who still offered sedans unlike Lincoln. I looked to the XT4 first, which still had normal door handles. And then I moved on to the sedans. The CT4 and the CT5 were both here, and I maintain these are both very stylish looking cars, keeping the Germans on their toes. The interiors are a bit more reserved though, which will come down to a matter of taste. Material wise, I thought they were fine. Not super plush, not like the Lincolns, but they were tasteful in their design elements and they were functional. The CT5 I thought had a particularly nice blue color. I was, however, disappointed that neither of the V-Series sedans were present, as I felt those would have been fun to explore. The Cadillac Lyriq EV was also present, a segment of vehicle that Lincoln had yet to indulge in. The Lyriq displays nicely, looking like a big hatchback, though it took me a second to figure out how to open the rear hatch from the outside. It had an auto-close feature too, which seemed handy. After a quick run-in with all the local sports team mascots and the running sausages, I went to check out the Porsche Taycan 4. The nice thing about the Porsches this year is that they were actually all open, so I could finally get inside and see what the hubbub is about. I've never actually been in a Porsche before, and I have never driven one. All in all, I was impressed. I quite liked the Taycan actually. It looked like what you'd expect Porsche to make for a shooting brake wagon hatchback thing. I found it stylish, and from what I've heard, the Taycan is an EV that actually still handles like a Porsche. I can't back that up personally in any way, but it sounds promising. I quite like the interior feel and materials in the seats. I like the ride height, but I found the center screen kinda laggy and the rear visibility through the back window with the mirror very poor. BMWs came next, and in a previous video I made, my thoughts on BMW's current design language was made rather clear. Mostly, I think it's not that great depending on the model. However, I will admit the XM, in which my previous video was about, has grown on me slightly. The more I soak it in, the more I realize it does kind of line up with some of my more avant-garde proclivities. I think it really depends on the color choices. The interior is a bit garish though, with all the tacky colored lighting. And somewhat interestingly, despite growing more okay with the XM styling, again kind of dependent on the color choices, I've since become less enthused by the M2's styling, which I originally didn't mind, but the more I sit with it, the more I realize I don't really like the way it's proportioned or just the way it's designed. The XM is a bit out there, but I think that is maybe actually helping its case, whereas the M2 is somewhere between too out there and too reserved and is neither striking nor beautiful. I was also relatively fine with the new electric i5 sedan, which wasn't going for the more absurd styling of some of the other BMWs, and still managed to look rather professional without doing its damnedest to attract attention to itself. The i4 was in a similar boat, and the larger kidney grille didn't seem too distracting here. And as a note, I always felt these looked more like tarantula mandibles, more than like beaver teeth. As such, I actually do kind of like the way the M3 looks. It looks aggressive like a big angry spider. The interiors on these cars looked upscale, and I liked the color choices on display. The i4 had some neat blue highlights. Not sure about the wheels, but whatever. The 7 Series was still a bit too unsightly for me, however, as was the iX, which my group spent some time discussing, largely agreeing it was visually repulsive and had what appeared to be an odd blind spot. After that, I spotted a grey Acura Integra A-Spec with an eye-catching red interior with Alcantara seats. So, taking a quick break from the Germans, we went to go look at these Japanese cars. And I quite like the Integra styling, and largely find most of Acura's current styling trends to be an improvement over previous designs, like the Birdbeaks. However, I was dismayed to find that the A-Spec seats looked far cooler than they were actually comfortable. Adjustments seemed few, the seat itself felt rather flat, and I didn't like the backing. I liked the interior otherwise, but I just wasn't a fan of the seats. They didn't seem like they would be very comfortable, even for short drives, much less longer drives. At least they didn't feel like they fit my body. We strolled over to Lexus after that, and where we all kind of largely agreed that we actually liked the big bow tie styling, and didn't like Lexus diminishing that design feature. I know it gets a bit of flack for being a bit big, but I think it actually really works, especially on the higher trim cars with the more mesh styling. I think they're appropriately eye-catching. More notable here, though, was the GX Prototype, which I thought was ruggedly handsome, despite it being a little more reserved than the other Lexuses. This was an actual Lexus-backed display area, not a dealer-backed one as far as I could tell, but I did find it a bit odd that they had this prototype on display, not like an actual production version, since I'm pretty sure they were on sale by the time of this show. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they were on sale already. We doubled back to the Mercedes-Benz section then, where I found the vehicle that on paper and on touch surprised me the most, the EQB 300. Mercedes design in general lately has been boring at best or EQS at worst. The EQB I felt wasn't half bad, maybe still not super elegant, but handsome actually enough. I also really liked the way the interior felt, and the EV specs on paper seemed rather good. In fact, if I recall correctly, the sticker on this was mid-40s to low 50s after the US EV rebate, which for what I saw and read really didn't seem half bad. Of course, I had no idea what the driving experience was like, and there were 2 points of discussion.
Just an estimate based on what I know of what they're at.
In winter, that could be dropped down to half. That's what sucks.
Well, if you leave it outside, yeah.
Right.
Don't leave it outside. Which, Mercedes, the odds are the people buying these brand new are not leaving these outside to freeze.
And the absolutely tiny third row. This car was simply too small to have 3 rows, but I imagine these extra seats were some kind of cafe regulation thing, I don't know. I was actually impressed by this otherwise mundane-looking crossover despite that. The seats were very strange. There was nothing more you could use those for except, I guess, car seats. Maybe this car is not exciting in some ways, but I feel it would, at least on paper, make for just a really good, regular driving car. Again, I don't know how it drives, but on paper, it seems very fine. And if hearing about regular, unassuming, unexciting cars is your thing, well, you're in luck. Because we're moving on to the second floor now, where I was immediately hooked by the brand new Buick Envista. This example was a base trim model in Ice Orange Metallic, which is a fantastic new color my video just doesn't do justice to. The interior, no, it's not super fancy, but it's designed well enough, seems built solidly enough for Chevy, and I like the dual material seating. The screen was crisp looking and it seemed very spacious, with a price of about $24,000. I honestly think this could be a very nice car for the money for just regular car things. No, an inline 3 engine isn't exciting in any way, but it's fuel efficient, the styling I think is sharp and fresh, and no, I have no idea how it handles. It really carries itself like a lifted sedan though, kind of not unlike the Toyota Crown actually. I wonder what one of these would look like lowered. The rear hatch is pretty big, the seats fold, and again, I just really love this color. Now, one thing notable here, my neighbor has one of these in a deep garnet red color in the highest trim, called the Aviator. But now, notably on the Aviator trim, the black trim is body matched, but this orange color is not offered on that trim, which I think is a shame, because I think this car would look even better full paint match without the black CUV cladding. I guess at $24,000, you could have some money left over to get that done, and maybe even get it at sedan height if you want. Though, I mean, it's probably not bad where it's at. And yeah, now, I'm talking a lot about a basic Buick, but Buick has been struggling in the US despite excellent customer ratings for satisfaction and reliability. But the brand often fails to shake its image of being a middle-class, older person's car. Maybe this new sharper styling direction and lower price point will get younger buyers in the door, but the name admittedly still rings old for a lot of us. But with Buick's US presence having greatly faltered, I suppose the younger generations coming up might not associate the Buick name in the same way that some of us do. So there may be hope for Buick yet. This new styling, by the way, comes from the Wildcat EV concept which graced the Chicago Auto Show last year. It would be kinda cool if Buick took that and did something like a Riata or Riviera again with the styling. I realize they probably don't have the budget nor the buyer market for such a car, but one can dream. After that, we checked out the Subarus, whose area usually has puppies. But the puppies were absent, so we looked at the Crosstrek Wilderness instead. I quite like the look of this car with its green paint and fat cladding giving an aggressive off-road appearance. My mom actually has a 2017 Crosstrek Limited, and I found the new Wilderness interior to be a vast improvement over that, if just for the softer, more comfortable seating material and support. Neither of us are really sold yet on Subaru's new large center screen, though we haven't really put one to use yet either. Overall, while I'm not a big fan of the Crosstrek, though I recognize its utility and simplicity, I did like this Crosstrek Wilderness. The current generation WRX was also on display, which I'm ambivalent towards. I don't hate the styling the way some people do, but I feel like the cladding is largely unnecessary, especially since the other non-CUV cars from Subaru, like the Legacy, the BRZ, and the Impreza wagon, don't feature this stuff. The interior is okay on this car, no strong opinions. I do like the newly designed seats, but I had a previous generation WRX, which I did not care for all that much due to the shifting feel, turbo lag, and the rev hang, and I don't think those base seats were all that great either. Now, I've heard this car has improved some of those things, but I haven't driven one to find out, and honestly, I'm not really in a rush to. I think Subaru still kills it with the blue colors, but that's kind of all I gotta say about the new WRX at this point. The new Legacy was also on display, with its really aggressive redesign, which gets a little silly looking, but the interior is still really quite nice. It's still a pretty unassuming car, and for that, it's the perfect sedan, I feel, for people who just want a regular, no-frills, comfortable, drivable, practical sedan. The Legacy is the most generic sedan on the market, and it's probably still one of the better options out there in the no-frills basic as it can be category. Though I do wonder if the new Buick Envista can't edge in on that a little bit, just on virtue of having a hatchback, and maybe if the Legacy could add maybe like a liftback of some kind, maybe, but the nice thing about it is you can't really make jokes about it like an Altima. It's a bit nicer than one. It's just a Legacy. The BRZ was here too. It was cool, it was automatic for some reason, and I had a brief discussion about the rear seats. But more exciting than that, however, was the Volkswagen's next door, where the US spec of the brand new ID Buzz was on display. This vehicle is already on the Euro market but is yet to be sold stateside, though sales should begin very soon for the 2025 model year. I have a previous video out discussing the Buzz where I admit that I'm actually rather excited for an EV for once, as I find this particular one interesting given it, in some essence, is a revival of the classic hippie combi. Though yes, in practice, it's more so just a minivan, but it's a stylish minivan with cool paint options. Although the doors were sometimes open on this and the lights were flashing, the car was unfortunately cordoned off, which meant I couldn't actually get inside it to check out the material feel, as apparently VW is using recycled materials to make the car more eco-friendly. My guess is that a hands-on display won't be available until the next round of auto shows once the car is already on sale. Lame, but whatever. Nearby this was a bit of a test track where a show demonstrator could drive you around a new car. In this case, I saw a demonstration of a current generation Prius showing off its acceleration and braking. Indoor tracks like this I remember being a big attraction at the Chicago Auto Show, which last year even had these big off-road displays to show off the capabilities of the Jeep Wranglers and Ford Broncos. I've never seen an indoor track in Milwaukee before, so this seemed to be a new thing for the show this year. Or I just never noticed it before, one of the two. Nearby this were more Japanese marques, including Honda and Nissan. I went over to the Nissan area first to check out the Nissan Frontier on display, which happened to be an example of a new special edition trim called the Hardbody, a name which borrows from the Nissan Hardbody pickups from the 1980s. I've long thought the current generation Frontier was pretty cool looking, especially in its highest spec form, but this hardbody took that look to a new level, I felt, blending modernity and retro flavor together for a pretty neat looking package, including the rock rails, a new front fascia, two-tone paint, body decals, and some really cool wheels, which the whole thing still cost a little over $45,000, so it was out of my reach, but for a 4x4 truck with cool looks and features, it didn't seem terrible in today's market. But then again, who knows if dealers are treating these as something special with markups or not compared to a regular Frontier. I'm not the biggest Nissan fan nor the biggest truck guy, but I do really quite like this truck, though maybe just that I like this kind of style of this truck, you know, with the knobby wheels, the cool wheels, the knobby tires, the cool wheels, the rock rails, stuff like that. I blame Back to the Future's Toyota truck. However, there is also the Honda Ridgeline, something my parents would probably be more interested in, as they already own a first generation model, which after more than 10 years is still trucking along nicely as an extra vehicle. In truth, the Ridgeline is a pretty capable small pickup with a decent interior room and a nice bed with plenty of storage and Honda reliability and a decent enough price tag. This Trailsport edition had some particularly nice amenities, including an orange accented interior. Some notes though, the digital display in the center looked a bit odd in the sense it looked like one of those aftermarket tablet screens you could just buy at a Best Buy, and the gear selector being a pad with buttons felt weird to me, as originally these cars were column shifted. Also, the first gen I felt had a more open concept to the interior, which I liked more, where this felt a bit tighter due to the center console extending all the way to the dash console area, and the rear seats seemed lifted a bit, which was nice and gave you a good view at the front, but I wonder how taller people would feel about that. Older Ridgelines also had a ceiling TV for the second row, although this had a panoramic sunroof instead. But then again, the passenger space for this generation simply didn't seem long enough to even accommodate one, which is probably due to this being more of a clean sheet pickup design as opposed to the old Ridgeline, which is basically a chopped and converted Honda Pilot, essentially. We also checked out a pair of nearly identical Honda Accords and tried to tell the difference between the hybrid model and the gas model. Really no way to tell outside of looking at the badging and the wheels. I'm actually quite a fan of the new Accord styling, feeling it is a vast improvement over previous generations. It's a sleek, handsome sedan, which is all the Accord ever needed to be. Nearby was an interactive display for building the Kia of your dreams. I went for the Kia Forte GT manual, but had difficulty figuring out how to properly use the touchless interface. It turned out my hand was simply in the wrong position, and once I figured it out, it became a bit easier to use after that. Notably, the Kia Forte is coming out with a new generation, a completely new body style. It's not clear if the Forte will have a GT trim or if it will even have a GT manual trim. I feel like the current one could be the end of its kind. Finally, we checked out the Chevys, which is where the new Equinox EV was on display, albeit cut off from the common crowd such as myself. More surprisingly, however, the Corvettes were open to the public. I was excited as I've never sat in one of these new C8s yet. In fact, the only Corvettes I've ever sat in were those of the C4 generation, which I do quite love. From photos, the C8 interior always looked pretty cool, but actually sitting in one, it's pretty nice for a Chevy. Maybe some will argue against this, but I think Chevy's done really well here, trying to give the Corvette a more upscale, special, sport luxury feeling. The Corvette historically has always bullied more highly priced exotics with its price point, but that was always mostly based just on what the car offered as a performance car. Only really starting with the C7, I feel that Chevy's try to start adding a more sport luxury feel to the Corvette's interior in order to compare it to the exotics it's fought on more than one field. Since that was usually the thing the Corvette lacked, a nice upscale, special feeling interior, it usually just felt like a regular Chevy interior. And I'll admit the giant center console line thing is a bit odd, but I do like the cockpit feeling in this car. It's not really a car for the passenger, since you're pretty much blocked off from them, and even the passenger seat controls are pointed at the driver. Honestly, they may as well have just thrown out the second seat. The majority of the materials felt nice and solid, though there was some plastic, and the paddle shifters felt and looked cheaper than the rest of the car by a long shot. But overall impressions from just looking at it, touching it, and sitting in it, very good. I know this isn't exactly a new car anymore, but these have always been cordoned off at most shows, until now, it seems. So I was a little excited being able to get close and personal with the C8 like this. There was even an Open ZL1 model, the same blue as the regular Stingray. These were just really cool to see. And that's kind of one of the points of this video, I guess. Really, that there were a lot of cool cars to see, and I didn't even get to video all of them. New Hyundais, including the crazy-looking Santa Fe and the exceptionally sleek Sonata N-Line, a whole bunch of kitted-out GMCs, custom wrap jobs from the local displays, the local tuning shops with their displays. We even skipped over a couple like Ford and Toyota, mostly by accident. And that's the thing, though. There's local car shows like this everywhere, every year, once a year sometimes, in the big cities, and sometimes the smaller ones. And if you have one of these trade shows nearby, go check it out, really. See what's new. You can only glean so much and get so much out of watching a video like this. You gotta see them in person, and although not all the shows have test drives, go drive something if they do. These shows, I think, are the best way to touch and drive and feel things that you would otherwise have to go to like a dealership to see. Especially when it comes to new cars. And Lord knows, we don't want to do that, because then we got the salesmen breathing down our necks for not letting us look at things whether we actually want to buy it or not, because, oh, not just anyone can walk in here and test drive a Stinger GT, friend. I need your first unborn child to just let you sit in it. So, my advice to you is go to these shows. It's not quite supporting the scene the same way going to like a local Cars and Coffee is, but it's another way to at least get familiar with what's coming out and to stay in the loop and in the current conversation. Go to these shows if you can find them, if they're nearby, and experience this stuff firsthand. Anyways, my name is Austin. Thank you for watching Veloci Midwest. New content rolls in slowly, but stay tuned. You and your cars.